Hello, everyone. I'm here to discuss the head coach openings and all of the head coach firings that happened this week as NFL season came to an end on Sunday. Today is Thursday, so some head coaches have been fired, and I don't guess any more will get fired now that David Coley got fired. I don't expect any more to get fired, but Matt Rule is definitely on the hot seat. If there were to be another head coaching firing, it's Matt Rule will be the only one that's probably going to get fired if there were to be another head coach firing this week or next week, whenever, because he apparently had a press conference today. I didn't listen to it. I haven't had a chance to listen to it. I've just heard apparently what I've heard off Twitter is he said a lot of ridiculous stuff that didn't matter, and it sounded like he had no idea what he was doing. So good job, Carolina. You guys made a good hire there in Matt Rule. Um, but I think the hiring of Matt Rule and Urban Meyer kind of just shows that college coach hirings do not work at all in the NFL. I mean, it's just a different league. I mean, we saw what happened with Nick Saban when he went to Miami. Now, I do think that certain head coaches, like Nick Saban, if he wanted to, he could get a job in the NFL again because he's already been a head coach in the NFL once before. It didn't work out, but he's been a head coach there before, and now he's had even more years of experience down in Alabama. So he could probably be a good head coach now if he wanted to be. Um, as long as he didn't do what Urban Meyer did. I mean, Urban Meyer had a chance to be successful if he didn't, just have a cancerous locker room from day one, where he kind of just pushed the alternative. He pushed the narrative of just he made it seem like they wanted to get rid of James Robinson, even though he had an 1,000-yard season coming out of Illinois State and an undrafted running back. It just kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me as to why he would, why they would draft Travis Etienne. I mean, I understand you want to make Trevor Lawrence happy and you want to give him his teammate that he had in college, whatever. But I mean, you're not helping out Trevor Lawrence by giving him Travis Etienne. You'd help him out by drafting an offensive lineman, or help him out by drafting a wide receiver, or help him out by giving the team a better defense. You know, it just that draft pick didn't make a lot of sense to me on draft night. It didn't make sense to me. After preseason and all that, and then tore his ACL or Achilles, and it didn't make any more. It just still doesn't make any sense to me as to why they drafted Travis Etienne. And I think Travis Etienne is a good player, but I don't think I don't think Jacksonville needs it. I mean, it's good to have a 1-2 punch, occasionally, but I just don't think it's going to be like one of those situations where like James Robinson's an aging veteran. He's good right now, but in 2 years he might not be the same. I mean, it's just not. I mean, James Robinson might not be the same now because he also tore his Achilles, but who knows? But it didn't make a lot of sense to me. But Urban Meyer also just kind of built cancerous locker rooms. I mean, he definitely deserved to level up from college to NFL. Even though because he just has been such a successful coach in college, he's deserved the call up to the NFL. He got it, and he just kind of wasted his opportunity away. And I don't really think that, and I think we're seeing kind of a similar thing with Matt Rule, where Matt Rule's in a different situation. Matt Rule, in my opinion, didn't deserve to be in the NFL. I didn't like the hiring when they made it. But 2 years ago, I didn't like the hiring. I haven't really liked the hiring at all. He hasn't shown me any promise as a head coach. The season started off for Carolina as a 3-0 start, and it was three. They started off 3-0, but I mean the teams they beat were the Houston Texans. They beat the let's see who else they beat. They beat the New Orleans Saints, who were having a COVID outbreak going on between their team. Like 9, 10 assistants were out, and some of the players I think were all out with COVID, and it was just kind of like a bad outbreak. But I mean, then again, the Saints did beat the Buccaneers without Sean Payton, but I don't know. But also New Orleans didn't have like anybody on their team that was really like they were still figuring themselves out as a team really, and it was just kind of like they were okay. But then they beat week one. They beat the Jets. They barely beat the Jets. If I can remember correctly, they barely beat the Jets in week one. That was an embarrassing game. I mean, it was close. Jets made that game competitive. I think for a long time. Yeah, the game was 19-14 against the Jets, who they're not the best team in the league. They're not the worst, but they're not good. And then it just didn't make a lot of sense to me to hire Matt Rule. Matt Rule's gonna get next season, and if he does well next year, then he'll get if he does well next year, he'll get another season. But if he goes another season of missing the playoffs, I would imagine, or if they don't show any improvement, because right now they don't show any improvement to me. I mean, you could make the case that well, it's not his fault. Sam Darnold's just not very good. Sam Darnold's useless, and it didn't turn out to be what they thought he was going to be. Cam Newton's playing on his last legs. PJ Walker's just a backup at best. And then last year he had last year he had a better quarterback, and they still They couldn't do any better. It's not like, it's just, ugh. I think Teddy Bridgewater would be better. They would have been better off with Teddy Bridgewater as their quarterback than having Sam Darnold or Cam Newton. Don't get me wrong. I like Cam Newton. I love Cam Newton. I think he's a great. I think he's a great guy. I think he's a great quarterback, or he was a great quarterback. He's not good now, but I thought he was a great quarterback when he was playing for Carolina back in the day. But he's just not the same. He hasn't showed any of that magic. He didn't show it last year with New England, except for that one game against Miami and the game against Seattle, and then he missed the game against. Or after he came back from COVID, he was not the same person. It was just kind of, I don't know. But it's just Cam Newton's not the same player that he was 6 years ago. They're kind of like Panthers are kind of doing what the Indiana Pacers in basketball are doing. They bring back an icon to distract the fans from the fact that they are not a good football team. They bring in Cam to distract the fans from the fact that their team is not going to do very well. And Cam Newton has an insane game coming back. He had 2 touchdowns in his first game back, and then Pacers just did this a few weeks ago where they signed Lance Stevenson to a hardship exception contract because of all the players out, with illness out with illness the last few weeks in the NBA, and they signed Stevenson, and they're like, oh, well, we're gonna bring back Lance Stevenson because he's an icon to the team, an icon to Indiana Pacers. It's amazing when he plays for the Pacers, and it's gonna distract from the fact that we suck, and it just doesn't work. It works for a few games. It's fun. It's exciting to see, but it doesn't get your team. It doesn't make your team better. It makes your fans happy for for a few games, a few weeks, whatever. But it doesn't really. It doesn't translate to victories. The Pacers were able to get a win with Lance Stevenson, and then now here they are back into their losing ways. They barely are getting. They got 100 points last night, or just barely, are getting over 100 points in each game. They've had a game the other day where they didn't get any. They didn't get over 100 points. And Carolina was able to just go in and beat the Arizona Cardinals, and we're like, whoa, maybe they got something here. And then they go in and they get absolutely just demolished they get demolished every single game for the rest of the season. So it's just, if Matt Rhule has one more chance, he's got one more chance, just one. And then if he screws it up next season, they start out really poorly or whatever, he's gonna get fired mid-season if they start out poorly. You can mark my words on that. And then, so now that we're looking at the head coaching openings, I think there's 8 of them, which is 1/4 of the NFL, which is the most I've seen in a long time. Because you look at last year's head coach openings, it was what, the Texans, Jaguars, uh, Jets, Chargers had an opening, the Lions had their opening, the Eagles had one, and then the Falcons had one. It was 7 last year. I think there was 7. At least there was at least 7 last year, so it's about normal. It's one more from last year. It's not bad. It just sounds a lot worse because people are tweeting out 1/4 of the NFL has head coach openings, and it's like whoa. But the Texans fired David Culley this evening, late afternoon, early evening, and then yesterday or 2 days ago, Joe Judge got fired from the Giants. So I want to talk about David Culley since he was the most recent one, and it just happened. They also fired offensive coordinator Tim Kelly, who was awful at his job, and I don't know how he was an offensive coordinator. But David Culley was wanting to keep the same staff, and that was enough for Nick Caserio to want to fire him for whatever reason. I don't get the whole reason. I don't get it because the Texans had no expectations. What were the Texans' thoughts that what was going to happen? You don't have Deshaun Watson. He's not going to. They probably. The only expectation you had was Deshaun Watson not going to play the whole season because of off the field stuff. But he's playing. He's coaching, and I think they made it. Let's see, Texans schedule. Let's see, they made it competitive against the Titans last week in a game that people counted them out. They said Texans have no chance at winning this game, and the Texans had really had no business being in this close of a game. They were making it competitive against teams. They were, it wasn't like when you go in, they start out with a victory over the Jaguars, then they keep it close with the Browns, then they get Davis Mills in the action, they lose to Carolina and whatever, and then they get slaughtered by the Bills. They had a lead against the Patriots. They choked the lead, however. Got killed by the Colts twice, and then they beat the Titans one time. Rams killed them, but then the Dolphins they were made it close. If they didn't turn the ball over about 60 times, they probably would have won. They gave us a scoregami against the Cardinals, and then they should have beaten the Jets probably a few weeks ago, but they didn't do that. They failed at doing so. But them winning 4 games is incredible to me for how bad of a team they had. On offense, you have Brandon Cooks, who's good. He's a good player on offense. Other than that, you have nobody else on offense that's really a good player, with Deshaun Watson being out. That's a skill position. I mean, Larry Tunsil's also really good at left tackle, but they don't have a good skill position player outside of Brandon Cooks. And you go to the defensive side of the ball, they got rid of all their linebackers and Whitney Mercilus and Menardrick McKinney and Zach Cunningham, and they then also were punishing Justin Reed for violating team protocols, which that's understandable if he violated. I don't know what the team protocol was that he violated, so I don't know if it was something that was like stupid. Then never mind. But if it was something that made sense, then sure, I'm fine with it. But they had no expectations. They weren't going to go and make the playoffs. They weren't going to win 8 games and be a competitive team this season. It's the Texans. Nobody expected the Texans to be good. They did better than what I thought they would do. A lot of people said, "Oh, they're going to be. If there's a team that's going to not win a game this year, it could be the Texans," because a lot of people don't have faith in Tyrod Taylor, which I don't get. I have plenty of faith in Tyrod Taylor. I probably would have rolled with him the whole season, but then Davis Mills started playing really well towards the end of the season off. Davis Mills was playing pretty well, so maybe they made the right decision there to bench Tyrod Taylor at the end. I don't know. But it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because they didn't have a whole lot. It's one season, and he had a good year. I mean, he had they won 4 games his first season, and there's been a team that's rebuilding. And it was gonna be a challenge. I mean, now they got to go next year, and they got to get a new head coach in the building. And from what I heard from Texans players, they said David Culley was the same person every single day. Like he was the same guy every day. He wasn't just change. Like if whatever, win, loss, tie, whatever they were, he was the same guy, and that's something that's good out of a head coach. But the few things that came out that pointed that I found a little interesting, a little shaky, were was whenever he was talking about in a press conference where Nick Caserio apparently like had some influence on the mid game play calls and the play calling in the game. That makes no sense to me, and that is definitely, that's definitely a worry of mine. That was a concern. That was the first thing that pointed out. Okay, that's a chance he could get fired because of that. But it just didn't seem like he had. I mean, the only reasons he had to be fired were because he had no good, like he didn't seem to have control of the owners didn't seem to really like him too much, ownership and whatever they didn't seem to like him, and that's really the only reason why is they don't like him. They just they had no reason to fire him. It wasn't a performance thing. He was fine as a performance. He took a team that was not gonna had no expectations and kind of got them to have a be a respectable team at the bottom of the barrel. I mean, they're one of the better bottom of the barrel teams. Um, if they were to have a if they were to play against each other, they were able to beat the Jaguars twice. I mean they could have beaten they really could have beaten the Jets. They probably would beat the Lions if those two teams were to play. Well, I don't know. Dan Campbell's been going a little crazy with his play calling. I don't know. But I mean, they could match up. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me, that firing at all. It really did not. I think David Cole deserved. I mean, if he had done a bad job next year and it looked about the same, they didn't look like they're moving in the right direction, then I get it if they were firing him. Or if he did what Urban Meyer did this year, that's the only reason I understand why he would get fired. Or if he did what John Gruden did, but he didn't do that. So it doesn't make any sense to me as to why he'd get fired. I don't like the head coaching thing over there. I think what Casario wants is he wants to get some guy from New England off of Bill Belichick's coaching tree and then have the New England Patriots in Houston be like the same team. If like Bill Belichick cuts somebody like Cam Newton will probably be a Texan next year as a quarterback, and then they'll have a bunch. They'll get rid of every player. They already got Brandon Cooks. They're getting all the guys that have played for the New England Patriots on their team. They're just going to it's going to be the Houston Patriots and the New England Patriots, and they're just going to become one team. And that's what's going to happen. That's what it looks like it's going to happen because New England's or Houston's already trying to interview um, Jared Mayo, and he's a coach for the Patriots, or he's played for the Patriots, and he's also trying to interview Brian Flores, who was a coach on the Patriots' staff for a few years. Just makes no sense to me, and I don't like it, and I don't think that job. If I'm a head coach that's or a coach that's looking to take a job for the Houston Texans, if I had a job if that's my only offer, then I'm going to take it. But if I get an offer from somewhere, literally anywhere else in the head coaching world, except for maybe Miami or Minnesota or something like that, then I'm not going to take that job because they have not done anything. They look dysfunctional. It's just they fire Bill O'Brien they should have just relieved Bill O'Brien from his. I mean, firing Bill O'Brien makes sense because they were doing really bad and he was doing stupid decisions as a team. But Bill O'Brien was fine as a head coach. He was just what killed Bill O'Brien was the fact that he wanted to be, he tried to, he just did not know how to make a good football team. He could coach a team, but he did not want to keep a good football team. He traded DeAndre Hopkins away for David Johnson, which makes no sense. I mean, at least David Johnson's still on the roster, but it makes no sense. and I don't like that head coaching job at all. If I was a head coach looking at it, and it's definitely in the bottom tier of attractive head coaching stuff because they don't have any good young talent over there. They're just like, whoa, I mean, like, what do I look over there and I see, I see Ross Blacklock and I see Davis Mills, Nico Collins, Brevin Jordan, and that just doesn't excite me. That's not exciting. There's plenty of other teams that have way better, one player that's better than all those guys. I mean, it's not exciting, and I'd rather go somewhere else with better young talent and better chance of success. Because I mean, let's be honest, the Texans will probably have to go through another head coach or two before they even make the playoffs, and then all of a sudden, then they'll fire him because he wants to, do something that they don't like. It just makes no sense. But I mean, Brian Flores would go. I mean, if Brian Flores went over there, they would probably keep Deshaun Watson around because Deshaun Watson wanted to go to Miami, and Brian Flores was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, and that was where Deshaun Watson was rumored to go if they were to make a trade. They ended up not having any trade go through, and then Brian Flores gets fired, so he might go to Houston. That's just something that I think could happen. But Gerard Mayo makes a lot of sense for me because of just the New England Patriots ties, which I don't know what the Texans are thinking. But then on Tuesday, it's the day after all the head coach firings happen on Monday usually, outside of the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Raiders because the Raiders had an interesting thing happen earlier in the year with John Gruden stepping down, and then obviously Urban Meyer getting fired. But for the Jaguars, that's a different thing. But the Giants decided to have all these meetings. It was on Wednesday, I think that it was Tuesday or Wednesday that Joe Judge got fired. But they were having meetings with Joe Judge trying to see if he wanted to keep his job, and he had an 11-minute rant talking about whatever and how this team's getting better, and he sees it and he's doing all this. But I mean, if his team's getting better, then they wouldn't be having to call QB sneaks on 3rd and 9 from their own 5-yard line. That was just a terrible play call. It makes no sense to me at all. I mean, I understand that your offensive coordinator was Jason Garrett, and he's not the most competent soul on earth for football. And they had Freddie Kitchens end up taking Jason Garrett's job. That was a horrible decision. I mean, there's only one good coach there. I mean, I didn't think Joe Judge was a good coach, anyways, and I didn't like the hiring whenever they announced it 2 years ago. Um, I mean, we're just seeing a theme here because I mean, David Coley's hiring was out of left field, and I didn't really like the hiring when they made it. But I mean, I started to think he would actually secure his job, but no, they fired him, which makes no sense to me. But um, what it is I think that you just look and you see that Joe Judge he had lost control of the team. I mean, you're getting booed at home by your fans, and you're calling QB sneaks with your third. I mean, it just shows he has no faith in his guys. Because if you're calling a QB sneak on a 3rd and 9, where you have to get, I mean, what kind of a call is that? I mean, I'm not even a head coach, and I'm not going to call that type of play. I'd call whatever. I mean, if you don't have faith in your players, then just call a wide receiver screen, or just throw a screen pass to Saquon Barkley and go from there, or call like a read option, or just do a halfback draw. Just call something basic, and just say, okay, well, if this works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Who our season's over. Just let's not. There's no need to call a QB sneak and make yourself look incompetent. It just makes no sense. And that was definitely my final straw as Joe Judge as the head coach for sure. And also because he just got booed constantly, and also and earlier in the year, I think this was the first big domino fall was whenever they had a giant fight break out in practice, and he acted like a baby about it. I mean, you see the way, I mean, because there was a fight happening at Lions practice. Dan Campbell was like, oh, we like that type that's the energy we want to have. And then you got the fight happening at the Giants practice, and he just starts going, nope, we're running sprints like we're a high school team. We're going to run suicides and all this. And it's like, come on, dude, it's not high school. And it's not, you don't need to do this. It makes no sense. You don't need to punish your players for having, high physicality in a practice. There's no need to do that at all. It just makes no sense. And another thing, the Giants have poor ownership because the owners live off-site. They do not, they're not at the facility every single day to see what goes on. And now with the Giants making this firing of Joe Judge, he only lasted 2 seasons. You look previously, Pat Shurmur only lasted 2 seasons. Granted, Pat Shurmur was not good, and he was not using the offense correctly. He had whatever. And Ben McAdoo or Bob whatever his name, Ben McAdoo, I think his name is. He was that one dude that was just really gross looking and scared me. But they fired him after 2 seasons, even though they went. I mean, they haven't had success since Tom Coughlin. Tom Coughlin was the reason. I mean, the year Ben McAdoo went 13-3, he was basically having a Tom Coughlin roster and just carried it over, and all he had to do was just kind of make sure that they, I mean, like, it was Tom Coughlin's team really, in 2016, and I don't get fired because I think if I remember correctly, Tom Coughlin got fired. Tom Coughlin just retired because he went to Jacksonville and he got fired over there, but he went to New York. He didn't deserve to get fired. I mean, he took your team he won your team 2 Super Bowls as a wild card team. I mean, you didn't think you don't think you're going to go in and beat the undefeated. The Patriots hadn't lost a single game on the regular season. You go in, you play them in the Super Bowl, and you upset them twice. And there's no need to fire Tom Coughlin. And then Tom Coughlin probably retire anyways. Even no matter what, he probably would have been retired by now. But they just have not found success since then. And it's a shame because they throw Kenny Golladay this big contract, and he didn't get a single touchdown all season. You draft Kadarius Toney, and I had more receiving yards than Kadarius Toney did through 3 weeks of the NFL season. That's just kind of embarrassing. I mean, I think Kadarius Toney like -4 yards receiving or something in week 3. Like I was actually having a better season than Kadarius Toney. I was more helpful to I had the same amount of touchdowns as Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney combined this season. And I mean, I'm not even on a roster. I mean, I could probably suit up and get hit sticked and then be in a hospital for about 3 months, 3 years, maybe 3 centuries. But that's besides the point. But I mean, that's just embarrassing. Kadarius Toney's good, and and he showed off his talent when he was on the field and healthy. But it's just embarrassing that you cannot use, that your best receiver is Golladay, Toney. You can't even use them. And I mean, and Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton, those are 2 other good, talented wide receivers on this team. And it's a shame. Those 2 guys were basically hurt for most of the season. Sterling Shepard had a hamstring injury, and it just bothered him. He kept trying to come back, and it kept bothering him. And then he had like a high ankle sprain or something crazy happen, and it ended his season. Darius Slayton had a hamstring issue, and he just kind of didn't look like he did last year. And it's just, it just doesn't. It just wasn't successful. I mean, it just doesn't. It just doesn't work out. You can't just go out and do all this and just expect people to kind of just forget about it. I mean, people are gonna hold that over. I mean, Andrew Thomas, at left tackle or right tackle, had more touchdown catches than Kadarius Toney and Kenny Golladay. That's your top 2 wide receivers that he's out has more touchdowns than. It just doesn't. It just doesn't work out. It just doesn't, and it was ridiculous to me that offense was just so bad. Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator, is really kind of just out there. He's on an island by himself out there in New York. I mean, so far I haven't actually seen Patrick Graham getting any defensive or any sort of head coaching offers, which he really doesn't deserve because the Giants' defense was not very good. But he's a good coordinator, and I mean their defense was solid. It's always going to be solid. It's the New York Giants. I mean, Patrick Graham's a good coach, and he probably should get some head coaching interviews if he hasn't already. I haven't been paying attention to all the interviews because it's just like I don't care about interviews. I just want to see. I want to see the head once they make the head coach hirings. That's when I will start to really care. Unless it's like a team that I care about, and none of these teams that fire their head coaches I care about. Like as a number one, like woo fan. But if the 49ers were to fire Kyle Shanahan, then I'd be like, oh, who are we interviewing and all this. Or if it's a 49ers coordinator or assistant that's getting an interview, then I'm like, oh, okay, we need to look out for this. But then we go to Monday's hirings. This is after the game's over and or after all the Sunday Week 18 games over, teams that seasons are over, they can fire their head coach, and it's all game. And the first one that broke was the Vikings firing Mike Zimmer. This one was not shocking to me. Mike Zimmer's been there a long time, and he's taken them to the playoffs and got them 1 game away from Super Bowl at one point with Case Keenum as a quarterback. But I mean, it didn't surprise me. After their Week 17 game against the Packers, where it's a Sunday night game, and they didn't have Kirk Cousins because he tested positive for COVID, and he's unvaccinated, so he couldn't have played Week 17. But you go to so you play Sean Mannion, and then he puts Kellen Mond in the game for like 1 or 2 drives, and then they ask him, "Are you want to take another look at the Kellen Mond next week because you're out of the playoffs? Might as well just let the young guys run." And he's like, "Not particularly." And they're like, "Oh, why is that?" And he's like, "Because I look at him every day." That's a man that does not care about anything. He knew his job was gone. He did not care, and he was just there for the money, or for his final game so he could earn his money and get out. Mike Zimmer could potentially get a head coaching job somewhere else. He might not. He might go to be. He's definitely a defensive coordinator if he doesn't get another opportunity as a head coach, because he definitely could get another opportunity as a head coaching somewhere else because of how he kind of made the Vikings. They weren't horrible. I mean, I don't remember really Minnesota just being at the bottom of the barrel with Mike Zimmer as head coach. I mean, they'll have a 7-9 season or 8-9, whatever, 9-8. 9-7, just had that little, right around 500 season. But they never were like crazy below 500 where they were like really terrible. And also, most of their losses were like one score games and all this, and it was just kind of like, well, one thing went differently, but he definitely deserved to get fired. It definitely is something that deserved to happen, but he definitely deserves to be a defensive coordinator at least if he doesn't end up getting a head coaching job elsewhere. That firing made sense to me. It wasn't surprising. I saw it coming. I knew it was going to happen after the Week 17 game, especially. But this season just was not a good season for them, and it just made sense for them to move on from him. Really, he'd been there a long time. They weren't getting much success anywhere, so just go ahead and fire him makes most sense to me. Right now, trying to hold in a sneeze, and it is very difficult. But then after that, like 10 minutes later, I'm just sitting in my study hall class, and then the Bears announced they're firing Matt Nagy, and that made sense to me as well. I knew that was coming as well. It wasn't a shocker because of um, because of how he was coaching. I mean, he's just a terrible play caller. He's good at building a cult. He's good at building a culture. He was able to do that, and he was able to do that successfully. And that was not the downfall of him. The downfall of him was that he's just a terrible offensive play caller, and he would take the play call and do his off to start the season off. And it was just bad. And also, them bringing in Justin Fields probably hurt him a little bit because you got that pressure of okay, well, Justin Fields is going to eventually be the starter, but I got to figure out a way to work him into the scheme and all this. And also, if I don't play him by a certain week, then NFL fans are going to be at my throat because I'm playing Andy Dalton over Justin Fields, which I kind of think made sense at the time because Justin Fields. I mean, just if you look at Justin Fields, he was a good quarterback. He played okay. He was okay. He was average. He was below average, really. He was mediocre. I mean, he was not mediocre. He was pretty bad. I mean, he was. It's not really fair to judge him just yet, but he was just below average. He was underwhelming because I thought he was going to be one of the better quarterbacks coming out of college. I really did. Out of that draft class, I thought Justin Fields would be the best one. And I'll admit that right now. I thought he'd be the best quarterback in the draft. He wasn't. I mean, he has time to still be the best quarterback in that draft, but I don't think he will end up being that way. But it makes sense to me to fire Matt Nagy because they just weren't going anywhere. They were going backwards. They were in a bad spot. They just did not look good on offense or defense. Their team looked terrible every year. I mean, they still were what they won 5 or 6 games this year. Last year they made the playoffs as just lucking in because the Cardinals decided that, or Kyler Murray decided his ankle wanted to go a different direction, and then I think something else happened that they needed to have happen to win. They ended up like beating. No, they didn't beat Green Bay. They lost. They just got lucky. That's what happened. But it just like, well, it didn't matter really to what happened. I don't think they weren't gonna go far no matter what. They were gonna be the 7th seed losing to the New Orleans Saints. But that firing made sense. And then a few minutes later, probably about 20, not 20 minutes, probably about 5 to 10 minutes later, I'm on my way going to my next class, and then all of a sudden I get the news Miami's firing Brian Flores. And I'm like, whoa, what is this about? Because Brian Flores he went 9-8. That's not correct. They missed the playoffs. They didn't go to the playoffs straight. They went 3 straight years with Brian Flores and didn't make the playoffs at all. But I mean, you look at their record; they were 10-6, and they were one game away from making the playoffs. They needed just a few more things to go their way, and they would have made the playoffs. And then this year it made sense if they ended up finishing out the season the way they started it off, where they were 1-0, and then they lost 7 in a row, but then they won 7 in a row, and that's when I'm like, okay, I think the Dolphins. That's when I think his job should have been safe. Is once they beat New Orleans or whatever, went on that 7-game win streak. Now, if they continue going in a slump and losing all these games right and left, and being being like 3-14 or something, okay, then maybe I understand moving on from him. But I mean, to move on from him because because you want to kind of have someone to blame for your mistakes. Okay, Chris Greer. I don't know. He's made some questionable draft choices. I mean, Tua over Herbert is going to look questionable. I mean, at the time, I think that was the obvious choice. Go ahead and just take Tua. That makes the most sense. But well, it doesn't make the most sense to me because Tua had the hip concerns and the injury concerns, and he's not been healthy. They were having to play Jacoby Brissett a ton of time in this season, and they've been having to play Ryan Fitzpatrick. I mean, Tua's not going to be anything special because you see the way that he was playing with last year. I mean, he could not finish a game out last season, or a few games out last season because he was just playing so bad. And they still went 10-6, having to run a 2 quarterback system for most of the year with Ryan Fitzpatrick and Tua Tagovailoa. And then this year they didn't have to do that this year where they just had to sub him out of the game because he was playing really bad, but he just couldn't stay on the field. Um, you know, then he came back in that Miami game and he looked pretty good actually. It's just it's strange. It's strange to me, and it just doesn't. I don't know. But I mean, it's bad draft picks, bad signings. I mean, what is Brian Flores going to do when his offense looks like Tua Tagovailoa, Miles Gaskin, Devontae Parker, Jalen Waddle, Mike Gesicki, and then one of the worst offensive lines I've ever seen on paper. That team performs really great. I mean, you see, I don't know. I mean, you give David Coley that spot in Miami or whatever. You swap those two guys around or whatever. The Texans would look competitive probably with Brian Flores down in Houston with the roster they have now. I don't. It doesn't make any sense to me because you give them a terrible team on offense. I mean, they had the 31st or 32nd best rushing. They were the worst. They were one of the worst two teams in rushing this season. That is just. It's just why fire him? You won 9 games with one of the worst rushing offenses, one of the worst offenses in the league, period, and in a below average defense, and you still won 9 games. How does that? That's just crazy to me. You look at the defense side of the ball. The defense started picking up the pace because they started looking a lot better because the offense started picking up the pace because they were just like give the ball to Jalen Waddle and let him cook, and they did. And then their defense didn't have to be on the field every 2 seconds because Tua turns the ball over constantly. I mean, the people on like Twitter and TikTok and Instagram, anytime someone posts about Tua having a terrible game or whatever, then they'll be like Tua turned the ball over, as they changed his last name from Tungavailoa to turn the ball over, and it just like it just doesn't make any sense to me why they fired him. It is my least favorite head coaching firing of all of them. That and the David Coley one. Those two just don't make any sense to me at all. Like the Joe Judge one makes sense. The Matt Nagy one, Mike Zimmer, and the Vic Fangio from Denver makes sense. Those make sense as firings. And then obviously you got the Urban Meyer getting fired and then Jordan stepping down. But those head coaching firings make sense because those guys were just not good at their jobs and they didn't look like they cared. Brian Flores didn't do anything wrong. He did everything right, and they just said, we need someone to blame, and it's not us. And we kind of think, it's another situation with the Dolphins. Stephen Ross is their owner. He is all the way. He doesn't even live in my. He didn't have anywhere. He's nowhere close to the facility. He just goes and occasionally watches the games, and then and you got somebody in his ear going, okay, well, see, this is my fault, but I think we need to blame Brian Flores because he could be coaching them better. That's his fault because he's not coaching them. He's not being a good coach. I mean, what do you expect him to do with a horrible team? I mean, I'm not gonna that's not his fault that Tua's playing poorly and he says, oh well, I want Deshaun Watson on my team because Deshaun Watson's proven a good quarterback. If Deshaun Watson gets beats these court cases, which I don't know if he will or won't. I don't know. We're expected to hear a verdict here in the next few months or in the next few weeks. But if he ends up getting past these allegations, then he's going to be a quarterback. He's going to start immediately, no matter where he goes, because it's Deshaun Watson, and he already proven himself to be a good quarterback whenever he was on the field. I mean, last season I actually ranked him as my third best quarterback in the NFL, and the Texans were a horrible team last year, and I said he was the third best quarterback in the NFL behind Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers, and then Josh Allen was the four. But Deshaun Watson, they got Deshaun Watson, and then he got past those allegations. That just makes that offense look a whole lot better. I mean, I get it. You don't want to move on from Tua because it's only been a year and a half, or half. You had a half a year last year with Tua the starter because you wanted to play Fitzpatrick and or let Tua learn the game. That makes sense. But then this season, I mean, you're saying Tua just kind of not doing anything. He looks the same like Tua Tagovailoa from last year. Maybe a little better. I mean, he got better as the year went on because he was just throwing checkdowns to Myles Gaskin, Salvon, Ahmed, and he had Mike Gesicki. I mean, Mike Gesicki and Jalen Waddle made him look a lot better than what he was. Devontae Parker is a different type of receiver because he's not like a check down. He's not a yards after a catch type guy. He's usually like that guy that gets open. He makes a nice little medium route, gets open, gets a catch, and he's like your big physical 50-50 ball guy. And then they give him Will Fuller in the offseason, which is a good signing because Will Fuller's a good receiver whenever he's not either suspended for doing drugs or But then he also just get hurt. He's like like I've had him on my fantasy football season like one time. I had him on fantasy football like twice. Tore his ACL both. He got suspended on one time, and then tore his ACL. He tears every single muscle in his body, and pulls a hamstring every single second. I mean, anytime he steps on the field, it's a pulled hamstring. He's gonna be out of the game in 2 plays. So you just can't give that type of offense to a head coach and then expect them to be all. I mean, them winning 9 games is incredible to me. Them being 10-6, 9-8, them going, whatever, that's impressive to me because you give them an offense that's just not good, It doesn't make any sense. You give them a terrible team and you just say, okay, go out here. You're gonna go. If you don't get us to the playoffs, then you're fired. It makes no sense. And I don't know. I mean, it didn't make sense to me. They also had Adam Gase as their previous head coach for the Dolphins. They fired him after 2 seasons because, in one of the seasons that he fired him, they made it to the playoffs with Ryan Tannehill as his starting quarterback. Ryan Tannehill's not the greatest quarterback. Now he's pretty good. He looks good down in Tennessee because he has Derrick Henry in the backfield and he's able to rely on out. But I mean, you look at the receivers he had. I think he had Jarvis Landry and Devontae Parker were his receivers down there. Not the greatest talents down there in Miami. Mike Wallace, and he's able to make that team look really really good. It just doesn't make any sense to fire Brian Flores for what he did, and I don't get it. And he's definitely gonna be a head coach. I mean, if he wanted to, he could take a head coach literally anywhere. Like certain teams wouldn't probably don't even have to interview Brian Flores because it's just like, okay, well, we know Brian Flores is a good coach. Let's just go ahead and hire him. Makes most sense. But then Denver so Saturday they played Saturday against Kansas City. They made that game really close, and then all of a sudden they're down by a touchdown. It's fourth down. They're in Kansas City territory. Chance to tie the game up. They're like, yeah, we're gonna kick a field goal with like 4 minutes left. It's like, that just shows you. I mean, like, I get your season's over. There's nothing to play for. I don't really mind. Change your. You're not going to make the playoffs if you go for it and convert and get a touchdown and beat the Chiefs. You're not going to win the game. Winning the game doesn't change whether or not you make the playoffs. It actually hurts you a little bit in the draft order. But I mean, at least it shows that you care and you're trying your best. But he goes out there and he says, "Okay, McManus, you're going to go kick field goal." And then now there's 4 minutes left. All the Chiefs got to do is all the Chiefs got to do is get like 3 first downs. And tell me if Chiefs are they got Tyreek Hill's a little banged up that game, but I mean, like, they still have Travis Kelce and they still have Patrick Mahomes, your quarterback. You're going to be able to you're going to be able to easily get 3-4 first downs and easily just secure the victory there. And I don't know, I don't get that decision at all. I don't at all. Poor decision making. And after the game, they're like, "Oh well, what separates you?" I mean, obviously, you guys haven't had the most success the last few seasons, and you're saying, Chargers are starting to become really good. Chargers have been really good. They're got a chance to make the playoffs. Raiders had a chance. The Raiders had a chance to make the playoffs. Chiefs have already won the division. Had a chance to be the first seed. They've won a Super Bowl since Vic Fangio's been a head coach. And they're like, "Oh, what separates you guys from doing? What separates you guys from the other 3 teams in your division?" And he's like, "Well, if you look at their rosters, they have elite quarterbacks. All of them. They all have a generational talent at quarterback." Which it makes sense. Mahomes is generational talent, and we all agree on that. Justin Herbert's a generational talent. I think everyone can agree on that for the most part. But then Derek Carr's not generational. Derek Carr's good. He's not generational. He's not some all-star, superstar. He's not some, oh, wow, look at that, Derek Carr. I want him on my football team. Not many people are going to go out and say that because Derek Carr's he's okay. He looks good for, whatever. He looks good for a few plays, and then he does something coward decision where he just does a check down or throws it away, and then he'll overthrow his receivers. He'll, get sacked constantly, about 3 times a game, fumble the ball, throw picks. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Him saying that. I mean, yeah, I mean it's true. It is true. They don't have great quarterbacks. It is definitely true, and I understand. And as a fan, I mean, like as me, I can say that because I'm not a Denver Broncos head coach right now, and I'm not looking to be the Denver Broncos head coach in the next, probably in the next 10 years. I probably won't be a head coach in the next 10 years. Probably the next 20 years, I probably won't be a head coach of a football team, but you look at they don't have generate. They don't. But you don't say that. You don't. That's not something you say as a head coach. You don't just go, oh well, they have. That's just like a. That's just you're trying to just blame somebody else for you being a terrible coach. I mean, it's like, oh well, they have this and they have. We don't got Tyreek Hill. They don't. Yeah, that's like, yeah, of course you don't. You got to be able to develop players. Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler have opportunities to be good. They just don't look like they're very good. I mean, Tim Patrick looks pretty good, and Cortland Sutton look pretty good. You just don't have a guy that can get them the ball, and it's just you don't say that though. It just doesn't make any sense to me. That's why you say one of those things about when you're as a head coach, you always got to kind of take the blame. You can't blame somebody else entirely for you guys being terrible. You can't. I mean, if they go, okay, well, what separates you guys, and then you go, well, that's on me as a coach. We got to get better as a head coach. We gotta work harder. We gotta prepare better. We gotta be a better team going forward. I gotta coach the guys better. They gotta, we gotta step up. How we prepare for the game. We gotta, add a few pieces here and there, and I think we'll be set in a few seasons. You don't go, oh well, we got Drew Lock as our quarterback, and they got Patrick Mahomes over there. So that's why we're not as good as they are. It's just an excuse for why you suck as a head coach. It's just bad. It's awful and it's sad, and I hate that they did that. Now, if I had to look at the attractiveness at each head coach, if I'm a head coach and I'm walking out here and I got interviews from all 8 the other interviews. Because Jacksonville's obviously fired their head coach. They're like, okay, whatever. Urban Meyer, did his thing. Raiders, Raiders are probably going to stick with Rich Bisaccia because that team went 7-5 under Rich Bisaccia. It's not the greatest record, but he was able to keep them afloat considering the John Gruden stuff happened early in the season. He takes over and they win 2 in a row as soon as he takes over, which is pretty incredible stuff. But then they have the Henry Ruggs stuff happen right after that, and that's just like two crazy like things that just don't happen in the city. You don't see that happening. I don't think I've ever had to experience a team go, have their head coach have to resign because he's been, a moron. And then you got Henry Ruggs who's going out here and, driving 156 miles an hour and being really, and getting DUIs. And then, and then they have like a few weeks later, they have the stuff with Damon Arnett going on Instagram saying that he's going to, he's threatening people on Instagram Live. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you do that? That's just three. David Arnett's wasn't going to be anything special. I was seeing him play on the, watching him play, because my dad's a Raiders fan. I watch every Raiders game every week. But it doesn't make any sense. He wasn't going to be any good. But why would you do that? You're an NFL player. I get it. Stuff happens where you get, but you don't just do that. It doesn't make any sense to do it. It really doesn't. And then they have the Nate Hobbs DUI situation. Just like Nate Hobbs had a DUI last week on Monday. It came out Monday, the day that Ben Roethlisberger was playing his final game in Heinz Field or whatever. I'm over there about to take a nap, and then I hear the news that Nate Hobbs has a DUI, and I'm like, oh my goodness. Not again. Because they just had that's the same situation. That's what happened with. Well, the Henry Ruggs situation was actually really weird because I was sitting in school, and it's lunch, and I'm sitting there next to my friend, and then I end up getting a notification that says Henry Ruggs got involved in a car accident. I was like, oh my goodness, that's sad. That's really bad. I was like, oh, I hope he's okay, because I didn't read the article at all. I just saw the news that Henry Ruggs. I just read the headline saying Henry Ruggs is involved in a car accident. I was like, okay, I hope he's okay, and I'm hope and I still think that I think Henry Ruggs will. I don't think Henry Ruggs will get another chance in the NFL. I really don't. It's a shame because he was really good. He was he was having a good season. He was developing just as I thought he would, and he was turning into receiver number 1 on the Vegas Raiders. Receiver 1, receiver 2. Really, that depends on how you want it. But he was becoming like their second option, really their main option. And you could give him the ball any time in the world, or anytime you wanted to. And then it just didn't work out, and it's unfortunate. It truly is because he was a good talent in the NFL. With his speed and everything, and he had good hands. He was catching every pass. He was catching a lot of passes, and Derek Carr could overthrow him, and he'd still catch it. So it's just, it's unfortunate that happened, or that it's unfortunate that it's a talent that went to waste by him, doing something really dumb. But him going 7-5 and having all these outside distractions and being an interim, a special teams head coach, never has been a head coach in his life. He's just this audition. This is like, here, we need you to do this. Just do your best, and we'll go from there. And they finish off make the playoffs. They first interim head coach to ever make the playoffs ever. It's the first time ever happened. The head coach gets fired, and then um, an interim takes over and wins. In the Super Bowl era, it's the first time it's ever happened. Um, and just for that, I think he probably will keep his job. Now, is he the best head coach in the world? Probably not. He'll probably get I think what they do is they give him a 1-2 year contract. See how he does next year with a full season. And if he does good, or he looks, if he does good or does poorly, whatever. If he does good, then they'll give him a long-term deal. But if they already think that he's a good head coach and that he's the best guy for, I think he's a good leader of men. But I don't know if he's the best head coach as far as as far as a head coach, like as a coach. I think he's a good, just a good leader of men. But I don't. Is he the best football coach to have for your team? He might be, and who knows. But I think Vegas will keep Bisaccia, so I'm not really going to count that as one of the. But if he gets, that's the most attractive opening. I'm going to Vegas immediately as a head coach if that job is to open up, and I have an offer from them. If I don't, I would look into Jacksonville. I would be a team on my top list. New York would be on the top of my list as well. But Miami and Houston are at the bottom of my list. Chicago and Minnesota and Denver are kind of in the middle. I'd take a job with Denver. I would take a job with. I wouldn't take a job with. I'd take a job with the Vikings. I would take a job really anywhere as a head coach. Honestly, just as long as I don't think I would want the Giants job. I don't want the Giants, the Texans, or the Dolphins jobs because of ownership of those 3 teams is just really poor. But I would take the Bears. I'd take the Vikings. I'd take a Raiders job if it were to open up. I'd take a Jaguars. And I'd take a Broncos job. Now, I would take the Raiders first, and then I'd probably go maybe Denver because I think they have the best chance of being successful pretty quickly. I don't have to go through a total rebuild. I'd take Jacksonville third. Then I'd take Minnesota fourth, Chicago fifth. Sixth, I would take the Giants. Seventh, the Dolphins. Eighth, Texans. That's how I rank it, and I think that the head coaches that'll probably get high. I think Brian Flores will get hired as a head coach. That'll be one of the vacancies. I bet you that Gerard Mayo dude will get a head coach. I don't really know much about him, so I don't actually. Let me look him up. I bet you he gets a head coach. Yeah, Gerard Mayo would definitely be a head coach for some of the Texans if he gets a job. Jim Harbaugh will probably be a head coach. What other guys? Versace will be one of the head coaches named, or Byron Leftwich will probably be a head coach. He's offensive coordinator for the Buccaneers. One of the Bills coordinators will get hired, whether it's Leslie Frazier or Brian Dabble. It could be both. Then let's see who else could potentially get hired as a head coach. Obviously, Urban Meyer's going to get hired as a head coach. I mean, he's a generational coach, once in a lifetime opportunity there if you hire him. I mean, really think he deserves a shot at getting a head coaching gig because he's just amazing. But I mean, that's the guys I'll probably get hired. I mean, you'll probably see, there'll be a surprise hire. There'll be someone that just comes way out of left field because there always is one of those types of hires. One of those hires that you're like, what are you doing? Or one of those, it's one of those teams. It's going to be somebody, and I bet you'll be the Texans, Giants, or Dolphins that make that decision to hire some just crazy head coach that no one's ever heard of before, or just make some crazy decision that just doesn't make any sense, like at all. Like some people might hire Joe Judge or something. They would be one of them to hire Joe Judge. It really would. It would not surprise me if that happened. Okay, it would surprise me, but Matt Patricia will probably get a head coaching job in Houston. Who knows? But that's all I got. It's 46 minutes long, so you can enjoy this. You hear me talking for 46 minutes about head coaches and how stupid some teams are for making certain decisions. And I'll see you guys all tomorrow with my picks for the playoffs. It's officially playoff season. Let's get ready. Super Bowl in about 4 weeks. It's going to be exciting.